Ontario's New Democratic Party has released its platform, and it's quite different from previous ones you might have seen when the party was on the road to Jerusalem. So joining us now to put this platform under the microscope, David Kaplan. He's a former Ontario Liberal cabinet minister, currently vice chair of Global Public Affairs. Michael Taube, former speechwriter for Prime Minister Stephen Harper, currently a columnist with the Washington Times. Marit Stiles, provincial and federal NDP strategist. Teresa Punn, Green Party candidate for the riding of Willowdale. And John Michael McGrath. He's a reporter with QP Briefing. And you didn't mind my little joke there about the road to Jerusalem, did you? No, that's okay. Good to have everybody around the table. That's great. We're going to put the platform under the microscope, but first, on the chance that you may not have heard every detail about it, Sheldon, if you would, let's bring up some of the planks in the NDP platform, which includes saving $600 million by creating a Minister of Savings and Accountability, hiring a financial accountability officer for the legislature, increase the corporate tax rate 1 point from 11.5% to 12.5%, reduce the small business tax rate from 4.5% to 3% by the year 2016, create a job creation tax credit worth 10% of an employee's salary up to $5,000, take the HST off electricity bills, reduce auto insurance rates by 15%, freeze post-secondary tuition and make provincial student loans interest-free, implement a 5-day home care guarantee for seniors, and expanded dental benefits for children from low-income families. That's some of what is in Andrea Horwath's plan that makes sense. That's what they call it. Let's go around the table here, and I just want to get general impressions on the thrust, the direction that this takes. David Kaplan, what do you think?
Well, this isn't your father's NDP. It's, I think, a remarkable document for what's not in there. I can't remember an NDP platform which didn't have something around poverty, which didn't have something around affordable housing and homelessness, which didn't have things around supportive housing. All of those measures are missing. Minimum wage, also not part of the platform. It's clear that Andrea Horwath is trying to tack to the center as Kathleen Wynne and the Liberals have tacked to the left. Whether it works or not remains to be seen.
We'll see on the 12th of June. Michael, your view?
Well, look, it's not my father's NDP either, although my father never voted New Democrat, but and it's not my platform either. But I think what is interesting about it is that the NDP is sort of trying in a bit of a way to reinvent the wheel, which I think is actually a very good idea. It's sort of reminiscent of what Roy Romano did in Saskatchewan, where you sort of take a different view of what's going on in politics today, what makes sense, and what will work better. And in many ways, if you actually look at the left of the political spectrum in Ontario right now, I would actually argue that the NDP is more of the center to the center left than the Liberals are today. I think it's a great strategy. I think it may actually work very well for them, and I think it will get them a lot of different votes. It won't get them small C conservative votes, but it'll get them a lot of Ontarians' votes.
Teresa.
I wonder if it is enough of a change to get those voters from the other parties, because this was kind of a last-minute unveiling of a platform, and it shocked a lot of people. Whether or not the shock will turn out in their favor or not is something that we'll find out.
Marit, I'm making you wait to the end. John Michael.
I think the direction is really interesting. We've seen this shift in the NDP ever since actually the 2011 election. They've been moving more towards the center. I don't know necessarily, we aren't seeing any evidence yet that it is really driving them as high in the polls as they want to be if they are going to form the next government. And that is, of course, what this move is all about. This isn't an NDP that is fighting to be the conscience of the legislature. This is an NDP that wants to form the government.
Okay, you've heard some of these observations. Respond if you like.
Well, first of all, I would differ with David. There's actually a lot there for people living in poverty. For example, we are talking about increasing the minimum wage, and we're talking about going higher than the Liberals have gone, and we're talking about tying that to inflation. Is it a different kind of budget? You know, our platform, this looks a lot to me like a platform that Jack Layton would have put forward in the last federal election. I think that the NDP has been talking a lot about issues that make sense for Ontarians. So there's some big issues that like we would have seen and be comfortable with in previous elections. You're also seeing more that speaks, I think, directly to the squeeze that most Ontarians are facing in their everyday lives. You know, I've been knocking on doors out there for my local MPP, Jonah Shine, and I find it comes up very regularly. People are concerned about the cost of things. They're concerned that rates have increased. I don't know how you can't deal with those issues. I mean, that's what people who are living close to the poverty line are dealing with every day.
But I think the suggestion is that in the past, the NDP would have had some things in their platform that may have been, quite frankly, a little unrealistic, but clearly planted their flag on the left end of the political spectrum and said, we represent this group of people. And it doesn't seem to be doing that today. It's reaching out to small business in a way that it never has before. does that make things confusing for people who don't follow things maybe as carefully as we all do around this table?
I don't think so. I mean, maybe what's confusing people is that the Liberals put forward a budget that included a lot of items that the NDP has been pushing for years. That's true.
But the NDP wouldn't support it.
Yeah, that's right. Because there is a point at which I think you have to look at whether or not a government deserves to be in power. Andrea Horwath said just this week. She said, when the OPP showed up at Kathleen Wynne's offices, the Premier's offices, to haul computers away, she thought to herself, can this government continue? Do they really have the trust of Ontarians? At a certain point, you have to make a decision. And the other item, by the way, the NDP worked for 3 long years to keep this government in power, to maintain a minority government. We thought that could work. We moved forward some important issues. We got some of what we asked for. And in the last budget, nothing that they promised was implemented. So at a certain point, then 770 promises.
One minor clarification here, and that when the OPP showed up, they actually weren't showing up, I don't think, to Kathleen Wynne's Premier's office. Right. They were showing up to her predecessor and dealing with Dalton McGuinty's Chief of Staff.
Okay, but in the Premier's office.
But that's not what you said, Mary. You're trying to characterize something that just isn't the accurate.
We're just going to want to be very careful about what we say here. Mm-hmm. As you've looked at this plan, and the NDP, they did take us through a technical briefing, and they showed us here's where our new revenues come from, 1 point raise in the corporate income tax, here's where our expenditures are. Does it feel like a realistic plan to you, financially speaking?
There are a few big question marks in terms of the healthcare spending. One of my colleagues has gone through the numbers, and it doesn't look like the NDP can hire the amount of nurses, for example, that they've talked about with the amount of money that they're spending. In general, I would say the question marks are around things like the HST off of hydro bills, which is a really big number. It's one of the largest single expenditures in the platform. And the question is, will the government have the money to give away for this kind of an expenditure? And is it actually something that an NDP government is going to want to do in the form that it's currently proposed?
Okay, let me pick up on healthcare, because we have 2 people here who know a lot about the healthcare system. You're a former health minister, you're a doctor. So start with what you know about the NDP platform and talk about the changes that they want to make and whether you think they make sense.
Well, I think there's a lot that's laudable. Credible, I don't think. 5-day home care guarantee, you don't have enough PSWs and the people who would provide support, personal support workers, I apologize, and the people who would provide the service to seniors or others who are in their home to be able to do that. Cut the emergency room wait time in half. Again, laudable, but how would you do that? You see, the problem isn't so much in the emergency department, but the people who are in hospital beds that should be in long-term care, in home care, should be in rehabilitation spots. Those things don't exist. So, I mean, if you want to build all of that capacity to free up those beds so that hospital ER can flow better, makes an awful lot of sense. On the dollars that they're talking about, it's impossible. It could never happen.
Teresa?
And I would echo the same thing. So again, while working in the hospital, a lot of our patients can't be moved up from emergency. So they're technically admitted and we're technically treating them, but they can't move up to a bed because the beds aren't there. At some points, 80% or more of my lists were patients who just didn't have another place to go. And sometimes home care isn't safe enough. So even if you do increase, shorten that home care wait to 5 days, that's often not enough for these patients. They need another place to go, and we don't have that place. And until we have that place, I don't see emerge times shortening, and certainly not by 50%. Franz Jelinas mentioned that the other part of the platform,
the NDP candidate in Nickel Belt.
She's the health critic, that they're actually planning, I believe, I forget the number, but family health clinics that would shoulder the burden from the emergency room. Mm-hmm. We didn't have time to discuss it at that point, but she mentioned that they were somehow different from walk-in clinics, which is a term she doesn't like, which a lot of people don't. But I couldn't understand how they were different. And would these, for example, new clinics provide laboratory services? Would they provide minor surgeries? Would they provide things that the emergency room currently provides for everyone after hours?
Let me go to Mard on the criticism then that laudable goals in healthcare, not realistic goals in healthcare. Your view?
I guess I question whether or not it's also not just partly an issue of the will. you have to set priorities and targets. We've asked this government, in fact, this government made a commitment to reduce home care waits and haven't been able to live up to that. We think that there are ways that we can get there. I mean, 50 family health clinics does not seem like that actually outrageous a proposal. I mean, we've been talking in this province. I used to work in the NDP caucus many years ago as a healthcare policy researcher. We talked then about expanding family health clinics. There's lots of work that can be done.
But can you hire all those new nurses and balance the books at the same time?
Well, I think that is the plan, and it's very carefully costed out. You may differ with me. I'm not really all that surprised that the Liberals and the Greens want to cast some doubt as to whether or not that can be achieved. But I think that, it's important to set goals. I think the NDP has a plan to make it so. We've been pushing along these lines for years, and it's really just a matter of priorities at a certain point.
Michael, how about deficit reduction? We know that the Conservative Party says if it wins government on the 12th of June, deficit reduction is the top job for it, and it will do it in 2 years. They're saying 3 years. You've looked at the numbers. Can it be done?
Sure, it can be done, but it's a question of how. And unfortunately, the problem that Tim Hudak has had since 2011 is he presents a lot of good policies that small C Conservatives like. It's the sort of message we want to hear. Of less government, more individual freedom, etc. But the problem is when all the math comes out, there always seem to be flaws with it. The Million Jobs Plan, for example, in theory, it's a great buzz clip. I mean, it's perfect to actually use all the way through.
But you're putting the Tory platform under the microscope,
Sure.
which is another show.
Exactly.
I want you to put hers under the microscope.
No, what I'm basically saying is, but the balance is with the public sector, which is, I think, where the NDP is really heading, we've had a bit of an issue with that. With the NDP overall, I mean, economics is always kind of interesting with them. One man's reality is another man's fantasy, so to speak. And I find a lot of their numbers to be interesting, but I don't think them to be realistic. I'll give you an easy juxtaposition. The job tax credit. In theory, small business owners should be immensely pleased with something like that because it benefits them to bring in more people, to get more people employed. Sounds great. But then you contrast it with an increase in the corporate income tax rate. And what do you think that's going to do to businesses that are here? It's going to motivate them to leave and to lose jobs. That's your contrast right there.
1 point in the corporate income tax will encourage companies to leave?
It's basically, corporations care about the bottom dollar. And they're not just going to sit there and accept and say, thank you, sir, may I have another? It doesn't work like that.
There are many ways that we can attract investment into this province. By reducing hydro rates, for example, that's something that other states have used to, but from the corporate perspective, that is something that the states have used to attract investment outside of Ontario because rates are so high here for corporations. Look, 1% increase in the corporate tax rate. We've looked at the numbers. We are way below where we're very low compared to many of the other states in our region, including the United States Great Lakes region. It's not going to impact the ability of businesses to invest in Ontario dramatically. And I think what's really important as well is that there are other things like investing in transit, investing in infrastructure that corporations look to when they look at somewhere to invest. What has happened under the Wynne government is we've seen investment.
The largest single transit expansion in memory, and that's a great thing. And opposed by the NDP at every step of the way.
And 100,000 more Ontarians today without jobs than at the peak of the economic recession.
JM.
The transit is an interesting example there because the entire NDP transit plank amounted to the exact same dollar amount that the Liberals proposed. Yeah. We don't know if they'll spend it exactly the same way that the Liberals are proposing to, but the Liberals say $29 billion. The NDP have used the exact same dollar amount. I'm not sure. I mean, if we're going to say that these investments are going to help bring jobs, then it's going to help the Liberals bring jobs just as much as it's going to help the NDP bring jobs.
But the difference, I think, a really key difference here is that we're going to attach conditions to our tax credits. We're going to say, here's an incentive to locate your business here. But instead of just giving it to you like this dead money, we're going to say, you have to keep those jobs here in Ontario. You can't just pack up and leave, as we have seen happen repeatedly under the Liberal government.
Well, in fact, Obama, you've lifted his program, which he's run away from because it didn't work.
This is the tax credit we're talking about, where you get a tax credit for hiring somebody.
And that was part of his plan, and he's run away from it because it doesn't work.
But the problem, unfortunately, is perception, and you know that as well as I do. The perception is, for a lot of Conservatives, is that it's free money. That's the way we always look at it. You can put whatever conditions and preconditions you want on it merit. It's how it looks to the people. And if you, for example, take hydro. It's $120 savings per year. Now, that's something tangible, that's something people understand they can put in their pocket. That's great. Yet, if you remember when the federal government was around, the UCCB, the Universal Child Care Benefit, that was a saving of $1,200 a year, or $120, or $100 times 12 months. The savings are very, very small. Sure, it's a number that people understand. It's a number that people can grasp and they can take they can chew into. But it's not something that's going to significantly change their lives. It just won't. But will it really matter?
To some people who are I've been speaking to lately, who would actually. I was just talking to him last night. He said to me, I'm paying $4 for 4 potatoes when I go to the grocery store, and the rates that I see. And she's a senior living in my neighborhood. She can't afford to move anywhere else. Her the daily cost of living for her has increased dramatically. $120 does have a dramatic impact on her life. And it combined with, what we can spend in other areas to improve services in our communities, which are going to be found through efficiencies in the system.
$10 a month is going to be significant for that senior, and that's
other
wonderful.
Service improvements that they're going to see.
But for the bulk of Ontarians, I don't think it will.
David wanted to make a point.
Well, I mean, $120 is $10 a month, which is perhaps significant, but is not going to seriously help the affordability for that senior living in their home.
With a lot of other additional service improvements.
In a number of areas, there's no help at all. Whether that is minimum wage, it is not in the platform. Whether that's with the retirement savings program, that was a key part of the NDP platform in 2011 that they've completely abandoned. So retirement security for seniors, there's only one party. And that's the Liberals and the budget they've presented where they're going to move ahead with that.
Let me get John Michael on that, because the NDP's position, if I understand it, is we don't have anything on a Made in Ontario pension plan in their plan, because their hope is to have a federal election next year which changes the government, and then improving the CPP. That's the strategy they would take. Is that a defensible plan?
Well, it's also part of the Liberal plan, right, to wait until hopefully, the Liberals hope Justin Trudeau is the next Prime Minister, and the NDP hope that Thomas Mulcair is the next Prime Minister. I mean, both sides here are hoping for an election that changes the Prime Minister in Ottawa. The difference, I would say here, and we can argue over how much of a difference it is that the Liberals are saying that they'll start the groundwork on the retirement plan before an election, so that if Prime Minister Justin Trudeau comes to office and says, I want to expand CPP, then Ontario will be ready to jump right in feet first.
They would work with Prime Minister Harper if they had a willing partner, or Mr. Mulcair if he happens to form a government.
Let me try this with Mart, though. The Made in Ontario pension plan is actually your party's idea. I mean, the Liberals stole it from you guys, but they're now saying, we're sticking with it, and you've abandoned it.
Look, 4 years ago, the NDP did put forward this idea in legislation.
2.5 years.
Hang on.
Sorry, in the election, but also 4 years ago in legislation, and it was defeated by the Liberals. So, if there was an opportunity then, now here we are, we're probably about a year away from a federal election. The question is this right now, and as you pointed out, Liberals are actually basically saying the same thing. Is this moment the right moment to introduce this plan? We're saying we will introduce a provincial pension plan, but we want to see, yes, we are. And
where is it? I don't understand on the plan.
It's not in your plan today.
Horwath has committed to that.
Where?
She has committed to it I think she committed to it in the Northern Debate, but she's been talking about it. So if we go for, and so if we can wait for a year and see if the CPP enhancements can take place, that is absolutely, nobody questions, is that the right way to go? Because the infrastructure exists. Why spend all that money now to put in place an infrastructure that won't be used?
The difference last time when the NDP proposed it and it wasn't agreed to by the Liberals was that it was voluntary, it wasn't mandatory. So that was a key difference to the plan that the Liberals are currently proposing.
The fact that the NDP plan would be voluntary
instead of mandatory. Exactly.
And in fairness, even if they were the first and the Liberals are the only ones running with it, I do agree with the NDP. They can certainly propose it later. I agree that it's not there, but certainly if you form government, you can have it later on. And secondly, we've learned in history that if two parties do the same thing, typically one gets hurt very badly. The free trade debate of 1988 was the classic example where the Liberals basically dominated the anti-free trade side, and the NDP, which has been anti-free trade or certainly opposed to a lot of principles for a long time, sort of trailed behind, and there was nothing Ed Broadbent could do at that time. So I think actually, if anything, I will defend the NDP on this one. I think it's smart to stay away from this now and let the Liberals ride with it, and if it fails, then you know what to do next.
Shall we talk about the elephant in the room?
Here's this Republican here? Me. All right. Yeah.
Let's talk about this letter that was written by more than 30 I guess we'd call them longtime stalwart New Democrats who had been, decades and decades in the party, who wrote a letter to Andrea Horwath. This is the Kaplan one. So we know about that letter. Jerry Kaplan, who's also a longtime New Democrat, wrote another piece for the Globe and Mail's website in which he said basically many of the same things that were in this letter. And let's do an excerpt from that. Jerry writes, "Dear Andrea, your election campaign has frankly been a mess. No coherent theme, no memorable policies, nothing to deal with the great concerns of New Democrats everywhere. Increasing inequality, the precarious lives of so many working people, reduced public services, global warming. I'm afraid you offer little sense that you understand Ontario's needs and that if elected, you have any serious plan to meet them. In fact, you've quite deliberately gone the other way. You offer mere tokens to those whose need is greatest, while your real target seems to be business people large and small. Yes, they have their needs too, some of them legitimate, but they also have their parties who cater to those needs. If business wants a sympathetic party to support, and they do, you can be sure they don't need and won't buy the NDP." Jerry Kaplan in the Globe and Mail website, on the Globe and Mail website, essentially echoing what was in that letter from 30 prominent, eminent, whatever you want to call them, stalwarts from the NDP. Okay, Marit.
Well,
Fire away.
I don't think the NDP should be taking strategic campaign advice from Jerry Kaplan. Jerry has, I can only remember one election in recent memory, well, the 20 years that I've been involved with the NDP, where Jerry didn't come out in an election and try to, criticize the approach that the party was taking.
But in fairness, it's more than just him.
Well, okay.
And he represents a particular view of where he believes the NDP should be.
Starting with Jerry, I would say that Jerry I worked for Jerry in the war room of a campaign under Howard Hampton, and I can assure you there were things that were decided at that point that probably, again, I just wouldn't be taking strategic campaign advice at this moment from him. However, I think there's some. Look, our party, in terms of the third letter of the 34, some of the folks on that letter, like Judy Rebick, I think has always been a loud, critic of the NDP. I don't see her at any NDP events ever,
Kathy Crow?
No, but I was going to say,
Kathy Crow's
people like Kathy Crow,
who is homelessness advocate,
who is supporting MPP Sherry DeNovo in her election. Many of the names on there are actually actively supporting their local MPPs in their campaigns. But in any case, look, we're a party of debate. We've had these conversations. I disagree, as I think Andrea Horwath does, that there's anything inherently not progressive or social democratic about inefficiencies in government or finding affordability issues.
No, but let's hit it on the head. The suggestion is in Kaplan's piece on the Globe website and in the letter by the 34 that the party's lost its way.
Yeah.
That's the allegation.
I really think if you look, and I have to say that the letter of the 34, it struck me that it came out right the day after I think the platform was released, and I thought, I don't think they've actually looked at the platform. I think that if you look at the platform, it's really not all that different than what we've put forward in past elections. It's also not very different from what Jack Layton brought forward in the last federal election. We are a party that is modernizing social democracy. I think that's fair to say. I think that we're talking about issues that matter to real Ontarians, real issues, and these are real problems that they have.
Let's get into this. Sure. Michael?
This reminds me of, and it may even remind you of it, it's the waffle movement all over again. It's the New Politics Initiative. This is the last gasp of the old guard NDP. Michelle Landsberg, Judy Rebick, Jerry Kaplan, names that have been associated with the NDP in a negative way sometimes as well, for many, many years. And this is sort of their last fight. This is what I was talking about earlier. The NDP is trying to sort of reinvent the wheel and trying to modernize the party, which I think is the right thing to do. These individuals, who certainly have the right to complain, they certainly have the right to criticize, they certainly have the right to say whatever they want to say, are not really representative of the NDP today. So this is their last gasp. I get what they're doing, I understand what they're doing, and certainly as a media story, it lasts for a few days. But in the grand scheme of things, I don't think Andrea Horwath and her senior fellows are really going to count.
I do just want to differ with you on one point, because I know there have been lots of New Democrats who've come out and said, that these are not, today's New Democrats, and I don't know that that's entirely fair, right? Like, there are people on that list that I know, and I don't know all of them, I probably know maybe 5 or 6 of them, who I think are, as I said, some of them are often critics of the party. But I do think we have room for that kind of discussion debate. The problem I have with that letter is that it was timed to come out during an election campaign, and I think that's unfortunate. And I think that there are probably many of those
come out, though.
What?
When else would it have come out?
Well, I
mean,
think
this is the
that's the kind of
party's
conversation.
move.
I'll give you an example. I'm a Toronto Riding Association president. I went to the NDP Provincial Council a couple months prior to the election being called, and I was there with another Toronto Riding Association president, Janet Sahlberg, who is a very prominent New Democrat.
This
We
is
went there.
Stephen Lewis's sister,
She is.
David Lewis's daughter.
We went there along with other riding association presidents. One of the things we wanted to do was have an opportunity to speak about the need for a strong platform on supporting transit, building, investing in transit, and Toronto issues. And we went to the council meeting, and we had a very fair conversation there. And you know what? Weeks later, a terrific Toronto platform was released. So I think that actually there is room in this party for conversation.
Okay. David, what's your view on
it's
this?
It's unfortunate they didn't take that approach.
Within all parties, there's lots of different views, whether it's Conservatives, Greens, Liberals, or New Democrats. What's unusual is twofold. One, for it to come out in the timing in the middle of a campaign. Usually, everyone's trying to rally around and support whatever the campaign, even if they have misgivings. And the other, which I found really striking, was the reaction to it, where you have the campaign co-chair, and the people on that list, I don't know all of them, I know some of them. I don't doubt the sincerity that any of them have, but essentially, said they're not even New Democrats. They're some of them are pseudo-liberals or some. I thought that in that kind of dismissive tone was.
They didn't say they were all New Democrats. They said they were supporters.
But it was.
I think in fairness,
Gilles Bisson, the
they're
campaign chair.
socialists. They're socialists more than they are lifelong New Democrats.
I think some people might. Anyways, how are they?
I'm not using that as a bad word. I'm just saying that.
But I think that dismissive tone really struck me and was very unlike what you've seen with New Democrats, where they have tended during election periods to have pulled together, rallied behind their leader or behind their platform or ideas, which I just find that very striking. I do think that this is very much an older guard versus someone who wants to tack the New Democrats more to the center, whether that's like a Tony Blair or a Roy Romano or a Jack Layton, fair enough. But I would say this, that I don't think Andrea has established her credibility the way a lot of those others had over the years, and I think that's why their campaign is in a bit of a stall mode.
John
It's
Michael.
worth saying that, all three parties have shifted in the last few years. The Liberals have come very far to the left from where Dalton McGuinty and Dwight Duncan had them. And even Tim Hudak, he spent most of last year talking about bringing in right-to-work legislation in Ontario, and then backed away from that when it was seen to be, politically damaging. If the NDP look like they've taken a real tack to the center or even a tack to the right, as some of those letter writers have said, it is at least in part because the Liberals have moved to the left. And we have this political idea that the NDP, their natural position is always 5 degrees to the left of the Liberals.
Exactly.
Michael.
I'm going to give one quick example. Sure. The IBEW, the International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers, which is definitely not on my side of the spectrum, but I wouldn't have actually naturally thought would be on David's side of the spectrum either. I drive by it every so often because my wife works not too far away from there. There is a mass of Liberal candidate signs sitting on the IBEW site.
They always had my side.
Yeah, but remember, a lot of unions right now have been very disgruntled by the fact that Andrea Horwath did not support the Liberal budget.
Okay,
so what you're seeing, this is the old guard again. These are the senior leaders. A lot of these senior leaders are old guard NDP. This is their frustration and their venting. I don't know what Unifor, for example, is doing. You can sit and you can disregard it all you want. When people drive by, they're not thinking, oh yeah, I remember that the David Kaplan sign was sitting there, X, Y, Z. They look at it now. Politics is basically that second, the minute you pass by, it doesn't look good
but
for the NDP.
Let me put this on the table for debate. And I think Andrea Horwath's position is, and Teresa, I'll get you to comment on this first. If we want to be pure as the driven snow, social democrats going way back, the conscience of the legislature, all of that, we can do that, and we'll come third again, and we can be sanctimonious and feel superior, but we're not going to get a chance to do anything. Her clear intention is to move more to the middle and adopt some more business-friendly policies in order to win. Now, she's allowed to do that, isn't she?
And I think it's a viable and a very good evolution for the party. I think it was just shocking for a lot of the public because it just seemed to come out of the blue. And again, a lot of people, including myself, we're not as well versed in politics as we should be. So I don't have the, the expertise right at the forefront that, but some of these policies, they're very similar and this is a natural progression. To the lay person, it just might be a bit of a shock. And then on top of that, you have the shock of this open letter, which again, to a layperson, can have a different impact than it would to someone who's more political savvy.
Right, but David, for example, in the same way that Kathleen Wynne has clearly redefined her brand of liberalism from her predecessors,
Clearly.
Andrea Horwath's allowed to do the same thing, presumably, isn't she?
Absolutely, and she should. She's got to put her stamp, and whatever it means to be a New Democrat in the 21st century, no question about that. There was no preconditioning, however. So people aren't ready for or prepared to accept it because it is, as Teresa said, out of the blue. The other thing that I would say is that you have to establish your credibility, and I don't know where Andrea has done that. What they've championed, things you've seen them talk about in the legislature, have not been of the nature of what came out in their policies.
Let me put that to Mark, because the criticism I have heard is when Bill Clinton became a quote-unquote New Democrat, taking the party from its George McGovern roots more to the center, or when Tony Blair took Labour to New Labour, more to the center in Great Britain, they led the party and they made sure the party was with them when they did it. The criticism I've heard of Andrea Horwath is this all comes out of the leader's office, and not only is the party membership not with her, but a lot of the caucus isn't either. That's what I hear.
I can only tell you what I see and know, which is that the ridings that I'm working in and involved with in downtown Toronto and the ridings that I hear from across the province are seeing a huge surge in volunteers and activists who want to come and help elect New Democrats. I think that where there may be a few people who are unhappy with what I think is, to be honest, mostly just the strategic messaging that she's using. Because if you look at the platform, there's lots in there. I mean, we're talking about businesses paying their fair share. There is nothing centrist about that. I mean, there may be, but it's certainly not giving up our progressive roots.
But there's only one MPP who showed up for the platform launch, which is highly unusual.
No, there was more than one.
No,
I'm sorry, that's
candidates.
not
Hang
true.
on.
That's not true.
Jagmeet Singh was there.
There were many candidates in the room.
Jonah Shine was there.
Yeah, there were many candidates in the room, and you're never going to get everybody out for an event like that.
We got 5 minutes left. I want to put one more issue on the table. There has been, best I can tell, JM, to you first on this, a significant, I don't know what the word in English is, but in French you'd say virage. There's a significant 180, I guess, in the way that Andrea Horwath has decided to put the accent on the campaign just in the last day or two. Yeah. In the northern debate in Thunder Bay, she came out with a 1-2 punch to the gut right from the opening bell with, this is a corrupt government, we got to get rid of liberal corruption. She had an event this morning, I think you and I were both at Queen's Park, where again, this is a corrupt government, we got to get rid of this corrupt government. Yep. What's going on here?
I think this gets a bit back to the discussion about messaging and which way the NDP is going. Without necessarily wanting to buy into the a hard right turn for the NDP, we've seen this messaging work before. We saw it work with Rob Ford here in Toronto, where you talk about waste, you talk about corruption, you talk about pinching the pennies. And that is basically a populist message. And the NDP, their communications people have said quite openly, Rob Ford's message isn't, strictly speaking, like a reactionary one. You can be progressive and watch the dimes, too.
Andrea Horwath channeling Rob Ford?
Wow. It's interesting. Rick Salutin in the Toronto Star called them right-wing populists, which I thought was amusing because I would just call them left-wing populists. But populism that John mentioned is actually absolutely correct, and I think that's actually a good thing for the NDP to use. It's something that has worked well, not just for conservatives, worked well for liberals too. It's a type of ideology and a type of fighting style that people like. I like the fact that she came out and called the Liberal government corrupt. In fact, during the leaders' debate, I hope that they all use this word within every 10 minutes in blocks, because but it's that simple word. Either corruption or the perception of corruptness, which can be even worse actually than being corrupt, that is really going to win points with the voters.
Teresa, does it lose its punch if you use it every 30 seconds?
I think it does if it's used by the same person or the same party. I agree with you that if all the different parties keep using it, then it adds a bit more flavor, it adds a bit more credibility. But at the same time, she doesn't want to be an opposition leader anymore. She wants to be the premier. So I think more policy and maybe a few of these, corrupt strategy punches would be helpful as well.
David? Throwing mud It's not been my experience that that's the way and the route to the Premier's office. Maybe Andrea's come to that conclusion, or Michael and the Conservatives have as well. But I think I've always tried to appeal to the better angels of people's nature to be more aspirational. I know that that's the way Kathleen Wynne has presented herself, although she has tried to contrast herself with both of her opponents, and there's nothing wrong with that. But I don't really think that Andrea's appeal is going to work. I remember her in the 2000 campaign. She made a very good first impression.
Which campaign?
2011 campaign. My apologies. She was hopeful. She was earnest. She seemed very sincere. We're seeing a very different Andrea Horwath this time around. I thought she would use both the ending of the 2011 campaign and the success they've had in by-elections as a springboard to much better results, and it hasn't materialized.
I think you're still seeing the same Andrea Horwath we've had all along. They don't call her the Steeltown scrapper for nothing, right? I mean, she's feisty.
Never called her that? I've never heard that before.
I've heard it, yeah.
Okay, anyway, finish the point.
Let her speak.
No. Finish the point.
I think there's a great video out, a new online ad that showcases Andrea and talks about her representing real people. Well, those real people have real fears, right? A lot has changed since 2011.
But she has always said, I'm here to make the legislature work for people.
Yeah.
And the picture of her on the bus is the big smiling face. And at the debate in Thunder Bay yesterday, and certainly at the availability this morning at Queen's Park, this was a woman with a very different image.
Yeah, well, I think in 2011, when in the last election, the Liberals showed how desperate they were to maintain power and the extremes they would go to.
What are you talking about? The same position as the NDP and the Conservatives.
Same
position.
Okay, hang on, one at a time. One at a time. Marit has the floor.
We saw 2 gas plants canceled. My children, your children are all going to be paying for that. Unfortunate decision was signed off by Kathleen Wynne, and this is a government that just simply, I think, does not have the trust of Ontarians. Now, will Andrea work? If she does not form government, will she continue to work to make minority government or majority governments work? Absolutely.
Okay, I'm
she's
jumping
shown
in here
that's her priority.
There's 4 of you and 1 of her, so she gets the last word. I want to thank everybody for coming into TVO tonight and helping us put the NDP platform under the microscope. It's good having you all here, and I suspect we'll see you all again before long. Thanks so much, everybody.
Thank you.
Support Ontario's public television. Donate at tvo.org.